This is the motto of the show Hour of the Truth. Rome never changes. They used to call us heretics and sent the Inquisition to kill us. Today they call us terrorists and send on their crusades. Times and methods may have changed, the goal still stays the same. Extirpate the remnant of the true Word of God, Bible-believing people who uphold the truths in Jesus Christ's name.
From 1203 to 1805, 50 million Christians died, suffering at the hands of Rome, 'cause they believed in Christ alone. They died through Europe, especially Spain, for they saw all but Christ as vain. He suffered by his death for men, to save them from their awful sin. 600 years of martyred saints that history cannot erase. With iron heel and iron hand, the Roman popes rule the land. Those ignorant of history may be swept into apostasy. We won't be lulled by Rome's sweet lie, with 50 million reasons why. Salvation is by faith alone, in Christ alone, by grace alone. A sovereign God give faith to man. Salvation's in the Maker's hand. This gospel offends Rome today. They offer up another way, a counterfeit, a compromise. Beware the ancient papal lie, with such a cloud of witnesses who by grace died in their Lord. Recall their memory to say, by the same faith we live today.
And this is life eternal, that they might know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent. Hello and welcome everybody to a new episode of Hour of the Truth and the third part of the University of Hidden History with Eric Jon Phelps. I don't want to take much time and go into a big explanation of what's it all about. I only want to tell you that we are citing from 4 different books. One is the History of Romanism, from the earliest corruptions of Christianity to the present time, with full chronological table, indexes and glossary, and 50 illustrated engravings by John Dowling. The other one is the book of the Jesuits' Complete History by Griesinger. And the third one is the History of Protestantism with 550 illustrations by James A Wylie. And of course the Footprints of the Jesuits that has been cited earlier by R.W. Thompson. Those books are read from, and also a very important essay from James C. Wylie, a Protestant pastor from the 19th century. That is where Eric begins with. And I just want to leave it over to Eric, and here and there I'm going to make a small comment within the video and also a larger comment in the end. And I hope that you all will be edified by this wonderful study that Eric presents us here with.
Good evening, this is Eric Jon Phelps. We are now going to begin the hour concerning the founding of the Jesuit order. And this is the result of the devil's response to the Lord's Protestant Reformation, when the Lord raised up Martin Luther to contend with the papacy by standing on the doctrines of the Word of God, which he could not go against his conscience. It was neither safe nor right. We read those immortal words last night, and now as a result, the devil will bring forth his champion. and that champion is Ignatius Loyola. Ignatius Loyola was the founder of the Jesuits, and we shall see that he was a military man, a man that he was absolutely and completely and totally given over to his purposes. Before we mention him, we shall go to a couple little paragraphs here finalizing what we owe to the Reformation. This is from the late Bishop John Charles Ryle, and I quote, "First and foremost, we owe to the Reformation an English Bible and the liberty for every man, woman, and child in the land to read it." By the way, the Reformation English Bible is the English Bible based upon the Hebrew Masoretic text and the Greek Textus Receptus, also called the Received Text, also called the Byzantine Text, also called the Majority Text. There are only two English Bibles based upon those texts. The first is the Geneva Bible, and the second is the AB 1611. All other Bibles are based on a pro-Westcott and Hort Greek text or Jerome's Latin Vulgate, which Westcott and Hort's Greek text follows. It was a secret Greek text in the Revision Committee in the 1870s, intended to overthrow the Textus Receptus and also to overthrow the AB 1611 with the English Revised Version. So therefore, the Jesuits, in seeking to destroy the Reformation Reformed British Empire, had to destroy or discredit its English Bible. So therefore, when we speak of an English Bible, we speak only of two, the Geneva Bible and or the AB 1611, the King James Bible. Back to our quote. "Of all the agencies which brought about the overthrow of popery in England, the translation of the Bible was the earliest and most powerful. It struck a blow at the root of the whole Romish system. Before a free Bible and fair play for all who used it, the Pope's champions could not long stand. The huge fabric of popery cracked, shivered, and fell to the ground like a pack of cards. With a Bible in every church, every thoughtful man soon saw that the religion of the priests had no warrant of Holy Scriptures. It is a striking and instructive fact that of all the agencies that combined to win the English Reformation, hardly any called forth such bitter opposition as the translation and circulation of the Scriptures. Even in 1519, long before Cranmer began his good work, Fox records that 6 men and a woman were burned at Coventry for teaching their children the Lord's Prayer and the 10 Commandments. By the way, Coventry was a target of the Jesuits when they used Goring's Luftwaffe to bomb Protestant Coventry in World War II in the 1940s.
And a little insert from me here. They were killed because they taught their children the Lord's Prayer and the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments, and that's the big problem in my understanding, are the problem that people who call themselves Christians do not understand the true Jesus Christ ministry. Because Jesus Christ put an end to the law of the Old Covenant, of which the 10 Commandments were the foremost and, let's say, most known laws. But Jesus Christ fulfilled the whole law of the Old Testament, that is the quote-unquote moral law and the quote-unquote ceremonial law. And I say quote-unquote because you do not find the terms moral law or ceremonial law in the Bible. There is no distinction. It is just the law of Moses. Everything Moses as law gave to the Israelites, beginning at Mount Horeb in Exodus chapter 20, and starting with Exodus chapter 16, where he was made known of the Sabbath. Everything of that is completely fulfilled by Jesus Christ and replaced. For more understanding of this subject, if you are not familiar with it, and if you also think, oh, the 10 Commandments is something that I really have to teach my children, watch my study, Yea, hath God said. The 10 Commandments are the law written in stone and written by the letter, but the letter kills, and the Spirit quickeneth. Meaning, the law is now taken from the letter into the Spirit, on the Spirit level. And Jesus Christ named his two great commandments in Mark chapter 12, verses 28 through 31. When the Pharisee came up to him and told him, "What is the first and foremost of all commandments?" Jesus Christ replied, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and mind and soul and power. This is the first commandment, and the second is likewise to it. Love your neighbor as yourself." That is it. It is this what replaced the old written law of the Old Testament with the new spiritual law of the New Testament, because the spirit of the Ten Commandments, the Sabbath question I put aside here for obvious reasons, the spirit of the Ten Commandments is everything that Jesus just said in Mark chapter 12, verses 28 to 31. And if you want to know what laws the new Christians, the new Christians, Christianity was new at the time. If you want to know what laws we have to keep, read the New Testament. There are very many places where Jesus Christ said, for example, it was told you as of old, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, if one hits you on the one cheek, then show him also the other. And if your enemy asks you to go 1 mile with him, go with him too. And so on and so on. This is the new law of Jesus Christ, the law of love. As Peter always said later on, against love there is no law. Love is the fulfilling of the law. And Jesus Christ fulfilled the law of the Old Testament, beginning with the Ten Commandments. So just teach your children, love your neighbor as yourself. Don't do to others what you don't want them to do to you. That is the law of a Christian. And by teaching the Ten Commandments, you are falling into the trap of not teaching true Christianity to the people and even to your children. So these people, when they have read the Bible, should have known that Jesus was the fulfilling of Daniel's 70th week, that Jesus was the fulfilling of the law, that he was the substance that threw the shadow, and the shadow was the law of the Old Testament, and now the substance came, and the shadow is no longer needed. Sorry for this long interruption, but I think this is very, very important. And I can tell you, just watch my study, Yea Hath God Said, or also read the book from Rob Alcock, A House Built on Sand, and you will understand these things much better as if you have not understood them up to now. But let's go back here to Eric Jon Phelps now.
And the charge against the accused persons was not the possession of a Bible, but of an English Bible, or Book of the New Law of England, or Book of the New Law of England, unquote. Afterwards, when the Reformation fairly began, nothing seems to have alarmed and enraged the Romish priesthood so much as the spread of English Bibles. It was this that cost the martyred reformer Tyndale his life. Tyndale was the father of the English Bible. He was burned because he would translate and circulate the Scriptures. The relentless enmity with which he was persecuted and finally hunted to death by Sir Thomas More and others tells a tale which he who runs may read. The priests knew and well that the game was up if the people once saw the inside of the Bible. He might as well have stopped the tide rising at Chepsaw or prevent Jupiter's satellites revolving around him as to stop the progress of the Protestant cause when the laity once began to read the Scriptures. In vain, Bishop Tunstall seized the book and Bishop Bonner burned it at Paul's cross. Its leading contents and principles ran through the land like fire, and from that period the Pope's cause in England was shaken to the center. You that read the Bible daily and delight in the law of the Lord, never forget that you owe that Bible to the Reformation. For another thing, we owe to the Reformation an open road to the throne of grace and the great fountain of peace with God. That blessed road had long been blocked up, and made impassable by heaps of rubbish of man's invention. Under pretense of mending and improving the road, the divines of Rome had spoiled it altogether. He who desired to obtain forgiveness had to seek it through a jungle of priests, saints, Mary worship, masses, penances, confessions, absolution, and the like, so that there might as well have been no throne of grace at all. The huge mass of rubbish was shoveled out of the way by the reformers. The doctrine of our glorious 11th article was everywhere preached and published and proclaimed. It's the 11th article of the Anglican Confession of the 39 Articles. People were taught that justification was by faith without the deeds of the law, and that every heavy-laden sinner on earth had a right to go straight to the Lord Jesus Christ for remission of sins, without waiting for pope or priest, confession or absolution, masses or extreme unction. From that time, the backbone of English popery was broken. You that are walking by faith and enjoying peace with God by simple trust in the precious blood of atonement, never forget that you owe its priceless privilege to the Reformation. We owe to the Reformation a true idea of Christian worship. In the days when Romanism ruled England undisturbed, the service of God's house must have been most Englishmen a mysterious performance which left them entirely in the hands of the priests. If they were present at any church service, they could only be present as sleeping partners or passive, ignorant spectators. It was a mere formal histrionic worship to which the laity could only bring their bodies, but in which their minds and reason and spirit and understanding could take no part at all. This solemn farce was completely stopped by the Reformers. They laid down the great principle of our 24th article, that it is a thing plainly repugnant to the Word of God and the custom of the primitive church to have public prayer in the church, to minister the sacraments in a tongue not understood by of the people, unquote. They introduced into every English church the English Bible, an English prayer book, English preaching, simple, plain services, and a simple, unthreatening, untheatrical administration of Christ's two sacraments. Of course, they could not make the people Christians, but from the Isle of Wight to Berwick-on-Tweed, and from the Land's End to the north of Foreland, a worship was set up in every church which the poorest laborer might understand. We owe to the Reformation a true notion of the office of a Christian minister. Before the eyes of Englishmen were opened by the Bible, there was a settled idea in all men's lands that the Christian ministry was a sacerdotal ministry, like that of the Jews, and that every clergyman was a sacrificing priest. The clergy were supposed to hold the keys to heaven and to be practically mediators between God and man. The natural result that they generally became spiritual tyrants and were exalted to a position which was enough to turn the head of any mortal man. Placed far too high, the priests became despots. Placed far too low, the laity became slaves. The Reformers brought the office of the clergy down to its scriptural level. They stripped it entirely of any sacerdotal character. They cast out the words sacrifice and altar from the prayer book. And though they retained the word priest, they retained it only in the sense of presbyter or elder. They taught the people everywhere that the clergy were not lords of the church, but like Paul and Timothy, its servants, Philippians 1:1. Ambassadors, messengers, witnesses, evangelists, teachers and ministers of the word and sacraments. Above all, they declared, as the ordination of the church shows, that the chief business of a Christian minister is to, quote, preach the word, to be diligent in prayer, and the reading of the scriptures, and to lay aside the study of the world and flesh, unquote. And as to any power of the keys and binding and loosing, they taught, as Jules' Apology distinctly informs us, that it was to be exercised by preaching the gospel to the penitent and setting before him an open door, and by warning sinners that, continuing in sin, they would find heaven's gate shut against them. You that know the value of a true Christian minister and the immense superiority of the pulpit to the confessional, never forget that for clear light on this point, you are indebted to the Reformation. Finally, we owe to the Reformation a right standard of Christian holiness. Before the days of Henry VIII, it was held by all that a monastic life and vows of celibacy were the only ways to attain eminent sanctity and escape sin. Myriads of men and women were continually becoming monks and nuns under the vain idea of becoming religious. The Reformers cut up by the roots this most fallacious idea by dissolving religious houses and dispersing their inhabitants. The thing was done roughly, no doubt, and the property of the abbeys and monasteries was disgracefully misapplied. But the measure was a wise one, and like a severe surgical operation, it saved health at the cost of temporary suffering. The great scriptural principle was established that true religion is to be seen, not retiring into holes and corners and fleeing from difficulties, but in doing our duty in every position to which God calls us, and manfully resisting the devil and overcoming him, that true holiness is to be exhibited. The Reformers ordered the 10 Commandments to be set up in every church and taught to every child, and the duty toward God and our neighbor to be set forth in the Old Catechism. They refused to give the slightest encouragement to the plausible notion of becoming saints by shirking the duties of our station. It is not too much to say that in process of time this new principle had an elevating and purifying effect on the whole tone of English morals. If England, with all her faults, has a higher standard of daily life than most countries, let us never forget that we owe it to the Reformation. By the way, a study was done several years ago, and I have a copy of it, that the Protestant nations, when they were reading the Bible, had a much higher moral standard than Catholic nations who did not read it. And of course, the reason was because of the Reformation. Such is the brief and condensed account of the positive blessings which the Reformation has conferred upon England. I have purposely done little more than name them, because they are not bygone things like popish superstitions, but living privileges with which we are all familiar. We bask in the full sunshine of them. They are part of the air we breathe. They are a rich inheritance which every resident in England, unconsciously, I fear, in many cases enjoys to this day. We have neither an adequate conception of the evils from which the Reformation freed us, nor the enormous good which it brought in. But this I am bold to assert: whatever England is among the nations of the earth, as a Christian country, wherever political liberty we have, whatever lighter freedom in religion, whatever purity and happiness there is in our homes, whatever protection and care for the poor, we owe it to the Protestant Reformation. The Reformation found Englishmen steeped in ignorance and left them in possession of knowledge, found them without Bibles and left them with a Bible in every church, found them in darkness and left them in comparative light, found them priest-ridden and left them enjoying the liberty which Christ bestows, found them strangers to the blood of atonement, to faith and grace and holiness, and left them, with the key to those things in their hands, from them blind and left them seeing, from them slaves and left them free. Forever let us thank God for the Reformation. It lighted a candle which ought never to be extinguished or allowed to grow dim. And forever let us remember that the Reformation was won for us by the blood of the martyrs, quite as much by their preaching and praying, writing and legislation. It was forged in the fires of Oxford and Smithfield. It cost the lives of one archbishop, 4 bishops, and 280 other men and women who died rather than give place to popery. Shall we in this century talk lightly of the great work they did? That's the 19th century, by the way. Shall we hold cheaply the privileges they won? Shall we entertain for a moment the ideal of forsaking Reformation principles and going back to Rome? Once more I say, God forbid. The man who counsels such a base apostasy and suicidal folly must be judicially blind. The iron collar has been broken. Let us not put it on again. The prison has been thrown open. Let us not resume the yoke and return to our chain. Again, this is an essay by Dr. John Charles Ryle in the late 1800s. Quote, "What do we owe to the Reformation?" And indeed, this is the truth. Many of God's people suffered awful deaths rather than submit to popery. And I mean impaled on spikes the horrible tortures of the Inquisition, the being buried alive to the women, and being burned with fire for the men who merely had a Bible in their home. We must remember that the very foundation of America, according to President Andrew Jackson, was the Bible, because he said, quote, "That, sir, the Bible, is the foundation upon which this republic rests." So without the Bible, we are not America. Without the Bible, we are not a Bible-believing Christian nation. And that is what we are today. That is what England is today, with less than 3% of her people attending any form of Protestant church service. Well, this leads us now to Jesuit order and the founding of the Jesuit order. And we shall read of this man, Ignatius Loyola, who was this unbelievable founder and who had a tremendous an iron will that he would never give up until he accomplished his goal. We will read from the great German preacher, the great German historian, Theodor Griesinger. He was a father historian in many ways to the German people, and the title of his book is The Jesuits, A Complete History of Their Open and Secret Proceedings from the Foundation of the Order to the Present Time. And the present time was 1873, the year after the Jesuits had been expelled from Germany. We read in this particular work concerning Ignatius Loyola, the founder of the Jesuit order. Now we shall start on the first page. Chapter 1, Chapter 2, the vicissitudes of the new saint and the 7 first Jesuits. To Jerusalem and Palestine for the conversion of the Turks was now the watchword of the converted Loyola. And, in fact, he betook himself immediately at the commencement of the year 1523 towards Barcelona in order to embark from there, first of all, to Italy. Money had he none, but that he did not distress himself, for being already accustomed to beg, he soon collected enough, not only to keep himself from starving, but to pay the passage money to Gaeta and the Neapolitan dominions, namely Italy. Having arrived there, he proceeded forthwith further towards Rome, always begging his way, reaching it on Palm Sunday. Remember, this is the Ignatius Loyola who was a noble of Spain, who was wounded in the Battle of Pamplona, who had his leg reset with a horrible resetting of the French commander whose doctor reset it, his leg only to wind up shorter than his other leg. Therefore, it was this Loyola who had his leg deliberately broken and reset again and stretched and pulled, hoping that his leg would be longer. And when his leg began to heal, he found out that it was, again, too short. So what he instructed his servant was to break the leg and stretch it on the rack, going through an awful, horrible pain. And this, Loyola observed that his leg, again, healed short, and he had a perpetual limp. But this is an example of his determination, and it is now reflected in his trip to Palestine. Having arrived there, he proceeded forthwith further towards Rome, always begging his way, reaching it on Palm Sunday. His first care, naturally enough, was to perform his devotions in all the stations and churches where pilgrims were wont to resort. He also had the unspeakable good fortune on Good Friday, the 5th of April, to receive along with other pilgrims the blessing of His Holiness Pope Hadrian VI, and according to some of his biographers, he was permitted to kiss the Pope's foot. But that as it may, I have only to remark that Inigo continued to support himself by begging, and that he generally passed the night in a miserable shed. On the 12th of April, he prosecuted his journey further towards Venice, always be it understood on foot, and begging his way. But although he was now so used to this mode of traveling, he this time nearly fell a victim to it, as from his miserable appearance he was universally looked upon as a plague, stricken person, and on that account not to be allowed to enter any town, seeing that the plague at the time was raging in a truly unmerciful manner in Upper Italy. He was therefore often compelled not only to sleep in the open air, which proved very prejudicial to his health, but he also found on this account little opportunity of soliciting alms, and accordingly at times endured frightful sufferings from hunger. At last he succeeded in reaching Venice, and contrived to introduce himself through the gate without detention by the sentries. He had no longer any lack of nourishment, as many benevolent hearts are everywhere to be found, and fortune favored him so much that a Spaniard of rank, the Duke Andre Guitti, obtained for him a free passage in an Italian state galley to Jaffa in Palestine. It nearly went badly, however, with him in his ship, on which he embarked on the 14th of July. Having plenty of spare time during the voyage, he employed in it preaching better manners to the sailors, accustomed as they were to swearing and obscene language, and being provoked thereby, they nearly threw him into the sea. But God and the captain of the ship protected him, and he thus reached his intended destination on the 1st of September in safety. He was now in Palestine, which he had so long earnestly desired to visit. So proceeding to Jerusalem with a caravan of pilgrims, he arrived there in good condition on the 4th of September. But scarcely had he visited the holy places and performed his devotions to the different spots over which Christ had wandered 1,500 years before, than he hastened to carry out the great aim he was desirous of accomplishing. In other words, he presented himself forthwith to the provincial father of the Franciscans and craved permission to commence his work of preaching and converting, namely the Muslims. The provincial, entering into conversation with the new laborer in the church fold, found to his great astonishment that the latter was not only completely ignorant of the language and religion of the Turks, but that the same was the case even as regards Christianity itself, or Catholicism itself, that it is to say, in theology, quote-unquote, the knowledge which Christ taught, he was quite a tyro. And for such a thoroughly ignorant man, who was also a perfectly beggarly and vagabond appearance, to believe himself fit for such a weighty undertaking as the education of those who did not believe in Christian or Roman Catholic dogma or religion, appeared to the provincial to be the purest nonsense, and so he told Ignatius to his face. The latter advanced that God might perhaps bring about a miracle and produce such a powerful effect upon the Turks that they might understand his preaching in the Spanish tongue. But disregarding such views, the provincial shook his head, and still the more vehemently, and ordered Ignatius to return forthwith to Europe. As the latter did not at once acquiesce in this suggestion, he nominated him a beggar missionary, and under an authority from the Pope to banish all pilgrims who were not compliant to his decrees. He had him conveyed on a certain small ship bound for Venice, where he safely arrived in January 1521.
No, here Eric goes into mistake. It's 1524. He misread that print, I guess.
After a 4-month voyage. There ended in an almost laughable manner the pilgrimage to Palestine, but it had so far done good that Ignatius obtained a full comprehension of his ignorance and became convinced how impossible it was for him to do anything as a preacher or converter while he had not previously made himself acquainted with the science of Christianity or Roman Catholicism and studied holy theology. He now had already attained his 33rd year and had not the slightest idea of even the rudiments of the Latin language. Moreover, the sole property he possessed consisted of the cloak that covered his body, miserable trousers which hardly reached to his knees, and a long frock ticking full of holes. However, he disregarded all this and resolved to return to Barcelona to commence there his studies. Quote, God and the Holy Mary, whose knight I am, he thought, will further assist me, and I hope that I will with ease collect sufficient by begging to complete my studies. Indeed, the Jesuits were first called the Knights of the Virgin Mary. And of course, the Virgin Mary is in fact the goddess of heaven, the Queen of heaven, the mother goddess of ancient Babylon and ancient Egypt. In short, he made his way from Venice by Genoa. Forthwith, he had to encounter many dangers before he arrived there, owing to the war that at the time was going on between Francis I of France and Charles V, Emperor of Germany and King of Spain. Among other adventures, he was taken prisoner by the Spaniards on suspicion of being a spy and treated to the scourge. When at length he reached Genoa, he there had the good fortune to be provided by the commander of the Spanish galleys, a former acquaintance, Rodrigue Portundo, with a free passage upon a ship, and he arrived safe and sound at Barcelona without further mishap. This shows the mettle of Ignatius Loyola, his utter determination to go to Palestine and to convert the Turks, in fact, to take Jerusalem from the Muslims, and this was one of the foremost purposes for the establishment of the Jesuit order. In addition to its establishment being that it was to be the Counter-Reformation, destroy the Protestant Reformation, destroy everything that had ever arisen out of the Protestant Reformation, including a Bible in your house and a written constitution to limit the powers of your government. Those two important, absolutely critical things to Western civilization, the Jesuits have completely and totally determined to overthrow. They have succeeded in America in overthrowing the Reformation Bible by discrediting the King James Bible, and they have succeeded in making this nation a pagan nation that is not allowed to have the Bible in any public forum. The Ten Commandments have been deliberately removed from all public arenas, and we now find ourselves just as pagan as the Soviet Union, all because of the works of the Jesuits. Having succeeded in those two areas, they are now moving in on the destruction of Western civilization and the creation of the New World Order, which is in fact a reversion back to the Old World Order, which was the Dark Ages. I now shall read a few pages from Book 15th of the History of Protestantism by the wonderful English historian James A. Wylie. In his second volume of this history, in 15th book, we have 54 pages of the most succinct description, purpose, and history of the Jesuit order, I believe, ever written. These 54 pages have been included at the end of my Vatican Assassins 3, third edition, at the end of the book, and are key and very important. Well, we shall read one paragraph and then we shall close. Protestantism had marshaled its spiritual forces a second time, and placing itself at the heart of Christendom at a point where three great empires met, it was laboring with redoubled vigor to propagate itself on all sides. It was expelling from into the air of the world the ancient superstition born of paganism and Judaism, which like an opaque veil had darkened the human mind. A new light was breaking on the eyes and a new life stirring in the souls of men. We shall close this moment and begin our study tomorrow evening. This is Eric Jon Phelps. Lord bless. Again, this is Eric Phelps, and we begin the reading of Wylie's work, Chapter 1, Book 15, on the Jesuits.
So here was a little break, as you can hear with the music, and then Eric didn't find the correct place to continue. He said in the end of last broadcast that he is going to read the very first paragraph of this page in the book 15 of James A Wylie's work, History of Protestantism, page 377. I have that here, and I will now read the complete first paragraph, and then Eric will continue in the second paragraph. Protestantism has marshaled its spiritual forces a second time, and placing itself at the heart of Christendom, at the point where three great empires met, it was laboring with redoubled vigor to propagate itself on all sides. It was expelling from the air of the world that ancient superstition, born of paganism and Judaism, which, like an opaque veil, had darkened the human mind. A new light was breaking on the eyes and a new life stirring in the souls of men. Schools of learning, pure churches, and free nations were springing up in different parts of Europe, while hundreds of thousands of disciples were ready by their holy lives or heroic deaths to serve that great cause which, having broken their ancient fetters, had made them the heirs of a new liberty and the citizens of a new world. It was clear that, if let alone for only a few years, Protestantism would achieve a victory so complete that it would be vain for any opposing power to think of renewing the contest. If that power which was seated in Geneva was to be withstood, and the tide of victory which was bearing it to dominion rolled back, there must be no longer delay in the measures necessary for achieving such a result.
It was further clear that armies would never effect the overthrow of Protestantism. The serried strength of Popish Europe had been put forth to crush it, but all in vain. Protestantism had risen only the stronger from the blows which, it was hoped, would overwhelm it. It was plain that other weapons must be forged and other armies mustered than those which Charles and Francis had been accustomed to lead into the field. It was now that the Jesuit corps was embodied, and it must be confessed that these new soldiers did more than all the armies of France and Spain to stem the tide of Protestant success and bind victory once more to the banners of Rome. This is most important because the Jesuit order did more to set back the Protestant Reformation than any other force of Europe, including all the armies of Charles V and succeeding Holy Roman Emperors. The Jesuits exist today. Their very purpose is for the destruction of the Reformation and the bringing the world back to the Dark Ages. And this should be taught in every Bible-believing church. We continue with the works of Wylie. We remember what Loyola went through, his suffering as a soldier, his trip to Jerusalem, and what do we have here? The author then says, the war in which Loyola and his 9 companions enrolled themselves when, on the 15th of August, 1534, they made their vow in the church of Montmartre, was to be waged against the Saracens of the East. That means the Muslims. They acted so far on their original design as to proceed to Venice, where they learned that their project was meanwhile impracticable. The war which had just broken out between the Republic and the Porte had closed the gates of Asia. They took this as an intimation that the field of their operations was to be in the Western world. Returning on their path, they now directed their steps towards Rome. In every town through which they passed on their way to the Eternal City, they left behind them an immense reputation for sanctity by their labors in the hospitals and their earliest addresses to the populace on the streets. As they drew nigh to Rome, and the hearts of some of his companions were beginning to despond, Loyola was cheered by a vision in which Christ appeared and said to him, quote, "In Rome will I be gracious unto thee," unquote. The hopes this vision inspired were not to be disappointed. Entering the gates of the capital of Christendom, or capital of Roman Catholicism, and throwing themselves at the feet of Paul III, they met a most gracious reception. The Pope hailed their order of assistance as most opportune. Mighty dangers in that hour threatened the papacy, and with the half of Europe in revolt, that is the Protestant Reformation, the northern half of Europe was breaking away from the Pope's temporal power. With the half of Europe in revolt, and the old monkish orders become incapable, this new and unexpected aid seemed sent by heaven. The rules and constitution of the new order were drafted and ultimately approved by the Pope. 2 peculiarities in the constitution of the prepared order specifically recommended it in the eyes of Paul III. The first was its vow of unconditional obedience. Unconditional obedience. The society swore to obey the Pope as an army does its general. It was not canonical, but military obedience, which its members offered him. They would go to wheresoever place, and whatsoever time, and on whatsoever errand he should be pleased to order them. They were, in short, to be not so much monks as soldiers. The second peculiarity was that their services were to be wholly gratuitous. Never would they ask so much as a penny for the papal see. It was resolved that the new order should bear the name of the Company of Jesus. Loyola modestly declined the honor of being accounted its founder. Christ himself, he affirmed, had dictated to him its constitution in his cave at Manresa. He was its real founder, whose name then could so appropriately bear his. The bull constituting it was issued on the 27th of September, 1540, and was entitled Regimini Militatis Ecclesiasti, and bore that the persons it enrolled into an army were to bear, quote, the standard of the cross, to wield the arms of God, to serve the Holy Lord, and the Roman Pontiff, his vicar on earth, unquote. This is the regiment, the militant regiment of the church. They are warriors. They are soldiers. They are, in their own minds, invincible. They have a 15-year education. And when they are finished, they will go anywhere and do anything under the guise of holy obedience, which is absolute obedience, and they will labor at their task until death if ordered. In the Jesuit, you have the perfect satanic completion of a man who has managed to control his flesh, exercising for the most part complete and total control, self-control, and composure in every situation. It is the Jesuit who is able to counter and fight down the Lord's Protestant Reformation by his satanic power given to the order directly by the devil for the purpose of overthrowing the Reformation. But Wylie continues, an army to conquer the world Loyola was forming, but he knew that nothing is stronger than its weakest part, and therefore the soundness of every link, the thorough discipline and tried fidelity of every soldier in this mighty host was with him an essential point. That could be secured only by making each individual, before enrolling himself, pass through an ordeal that should sift and try and harden him to the utmost. But first, the Company of Jesus had to elect a head. The dignity was offered to Loyola. He modestly declined the post, as Julius Caesar did the diadem. After 4 days spent in prayer and penance, his disciples returned and humbly supplicated him to be their chief. Ignatius, viewing this as an intimation of the will of God, consented. He was the first general of the order. Few royal scepters bring with them such an amount of real power as this election bestowed on Loyola. The day would come when the tiara itself would bow before that yet mightier authority which was represented by the cap of the general of the Jesuits. So, we have Loyola becoming an absolute monarch over the Jesuit order and ultimately over the papacy. Wylie continues, let us next attend to the organization of the society. The Jesuit monarchy covers the globe. At its head, as we have said, is a sovereign who rules over all, but is himself ruled over by no one. First come 6 grand divisions termed assistancies, satrapies, or princedoms. By the way, today there are 10 assistancies, and there is an American assistant to the Jesuit Superior General Peter Hans Kolvenbach. It is this American Jesuit assistant who is the most powerful American Jesuit and one of the most powerful Jesuits in the world, and he too is a general, but he is not the Superior General. These comprehend the space stretching from the Indies to the Mediterranean, more particularly India, Spain and Portugal, Germany and France, Italy and Sicily, Poland and Lithuania. Outside this area, the Jesuits have established missions. The heads of these 6 divisions act as coadjutors to their general. They are his staff or cabinet. The Jesuit general has a staff of assistants to him, and a confessor, and an advisor. So the Jesuit general is taking advice from the Scriptures by employing the maxim, in the multitude of counsel there is safety. Continue. These 6 great divisions are subdivided into 37 provinces. Today there are 85 provinces. Over each province is placed a chief termed a provincial. In America there are 10 provincials, corresponding to our 10 regional governments. The provinces are again subdivided into a variety of houses or establishments. First come the houses of the professed, providing over by their provost. Next come the colleges or houses of the novices and scholars, presided over by their rector or superior. Where these cannot be established, residences are erected for the accommodation of the priests who preambulate the district, preaching and hearing confessions. And by the way, the confessional is nothing more than a system of international espionage. These men have no power to forgive sins. They are gathering information for the benefit of the Jesuit general to further the quest to make the Pope the universal monarch of the world, and thus is their phrase ad majorem Dei gloriam, or for the greater glory of God. And lastly may be mentioned mission houses in which Jesuits live unnoticed as secular clergy, but seeking by all possible means to promote the interests of the society. From his chamber in Rome, the eye of the general surveys the world of Jesuitism to its farthest bounds. There is nothing done in it which he does not see. There is nothing spoken in it which he does not hear. It becomes us to note the means by which this almost superhuman intelligence is acquired. Remember now, the Black Pope controls this international intelligence community composed of all the intelligence agencies of the earth. Every year a list of the houses and members of the society with the name, talents, virtues, and failings of each is laid before the general. In addition to the annual report, every one of the 37 provincials must send him a report monthly of the state of his province. This is, by the way, the political as well as the spiritual state of the province. Can you imagine what the 10 provincials in America do when they send their monthly report to the Jesuit general on the state of things in the United States? He must inform him minutely of its political and ecclesiastical condition. Every superior of a college must report once every 3 months. This means Georgetown University and Fordham University, being 2 of the 28 major universities that Jesuits control in this country. The heads of houses of residence, the heads of novitiates, must do the same. In short, from every quarter of his vast dominions come a monthly and a tri-monthly report. If the matter reported on has reference to persons outside the society, the constitutions direct that the provincials and superiors shall write to the general in cipher. That means code, secret code. Such precautions are taken against enemies, says M. de Chalois, who is a Frenchman. Is the system of the Jesuits inimical to all governments? Thus to the general of the Jesuits, the world lies naked and open. He sees by 1,000 eyes. He hears by 1,000 ears. And when he has a behest to execute, he can select the fittest agent from an innumerable host, all of whom are ready to do his bidding. One of the Jesuit generals says, we even have martyrs for our purposes. The past history, the good and the evil qualities of every member of his society, his talents, his dispositions, his inclinations, his tastes, his secret thoughts, have all been strictly examined, minutely chronicled, and laid before the eye of the general. It is the same as if he were present in person and had seen and conversed with him. All ranks from the nobleman to the day laborer, all trades from the opulent banker to the shoemaker and porter, all professions from the stoled dignitary and the learned professor to the cowled mendicant, all grades of literary men, from the philosopher, the mathematician, and the historian, to the schoolmaster and the reporter on the provincial newspaper, are enrolled in the society. These are called Jesuit coadjutors. America is full of them. marshaled and in continued attendance before their chief stand his host, so large in numbers and so various in gifts. At his word they go, and at his word they come, speeding over seas and mountains, across frozen steppes or burning plains on his errand. Pestilence or battle or death may lie in his path. The Jesuit's obedience is not less prompt. Selecting one, the general sends him to the royal cabinet. Making choice of another, he opens him the door of Parliament. A third he enrolls in a political club, like the Jacobins. A fourth he places in the pulpit of a church, whose creed he professes that he may betray it. A fifth he commands to mingle in the saloons of the low peoples. A sixth he sends to act his part in the evangelical conference. A seventh he seats beside the domestic hearth. And an eighth he sends afar off to barbarous tribes, where speaking a strange tongue and wearing a rough garment, he executes amidst hardships and perils this will of his superior. There is no disguise which the Jesuit will not wear, nor art he will not employ, nor motive he will not feign, no creed he will not profess, provided only he can acquit himself as a true soldier of the Jesuit army and accomplish the work on which he has been set forth. "We have men," exclaimed a general exultingly, as he glanced over the long roll of philosophers, orators, statesmen, and scholars who stood before him, ready to serve him in the state or in the church, in the camp or in the school, at home or abroad. "We have men for martyrdom, if they be required." Men like Captain Smith of the Titanic. We go on in Wylie's work and read a bit more. "We have traced at some length the long and severe discipline which every member must undergo before being admitted into the secret class by that way of eminence constitute the society. Before arriving on the threshold of the inner circle of Jesuitism, 3 times has the candidate passed through that terrible ordeal, first as a novice, secondly as a scholar, thirdly as a coadjutor. Is his training held to be complete when he is admitted among the professed? No. A 4th time must he undergo the same dreadful process. He is thrown back again into the crucible and kept amid its fires till pride and obstinacy and self-will and love of ease, till judgment, soul, and conscience have all been purged out of him, and then he comes forth fully refined, completely tempered and hardened, a vessel fully fitted for the use of his general, prepared to execute with a conscience that never remonstrates his most terrible command, and to undertake with a will that never rebels the most difficult and dangerous enterprises he may assign him. In the words of an eloquent writer, talk of drilling and discipline. Why, the drilling and the discipline which gave to Alexander the men that marched in triumph from Macedon to this Indus, to Caesar the men that marched in triumph from Rome to the wilds of Caledonia, to Hannibal the men that marched in triumph from Carthage to Rome, to Napoleon the men whose achievements surpassed in brilliance the united glories of the soldiers of Macedon, of Carthage, and of Rome, and to Wellington the men who smote into the dust the very flower of Napoleon's chivalry. Why, the drilling and the discipline of all these combined cannot, in point of stern, rigid, and protracted severity for a moment, be compared to the drilling and discipline which fitted and molded men for becoming full members of the militant institute of the Jesuits." Unquote. Such, Loyola saw, was the core that was needed to confront the armies of Protestantism and turn back the advancing tide of light and liberty. By the way, the United States Marine Corps is patterned after the Jesuit order. One of the things they do in the Corps in basic training is they break your will into the dust so that they can remold you and make you into an absolute obedient slave to your superior. And that is why the Marine Corps is patterned after the Jesuit Corps.
Just a little comment of mine here. I think the movie Platoon from, I think, the 1980s, this so-called anti-war movie about the Vietnam War, where in the first time, a movie by Stanley Kubrick, by the way, a high-degree Freemason, a war where in the first part of the movie we see the breaking of the conscience and of the will of the people before they go into Vietnam fighting. This movie is an absolute nice example, if you can say nice in any way in this regard. This is a real example of how this is done. And this is just in the Marine Corps. This is not in the Jesuits. The Jesuits are far worse than what the Marine Corps is, even though the Marine Corps, as Jon Phelps says, is fostered after the Jesuits. But I think this movie, Platoon, is a very good example.
Continuing on with Wylie, we shall have a few more words. Now we shall go to Thompson, just for a few minutes, in his Footprints of the Jesuits. He says, concerning the Jesuits, their society is so united and compact that its ranks cannot be broken. They are everywhere the same, moved by a common impulse under the dictation of their general in Rome. They are the deadly enemies of civil and religious liberty. Nothing that stands in their way can become so sacred as to escape their vengeance. Protestantism has borne no fruits to which they have ever been reconciled. They consider the Reformation which gave birth to it to have been criminal resistance to the only rightful authority upon earth, that which proceeds from church and state combined. They believe that the condition of mankind during the Middle Ages, staggering under the weight of feudal oppression, was preferable to modern progress and enlightenment, that human happiness would be promoted by the return to that period, that the political right of self-government by the people cannot be set up against the higher right of papal and monarchical power, and that the progress of the advancing nations is delusive and unsubstantial, and that institutions which guarantee civil and religious freedom, if not arrested by some coercive power strong enough to put an end to them, will lead through heresy to social ruin and desolation. If at the period of the Reformation this society had not been established for the express purpose of counteracting its influence, a knowledge of the difference between primitive Christianity and the prevailing dogmas might have led to such reforms as would have reconciled Christians to dwell together in peace and concord. But when a dove should have been sent forth bearing the olive branch of Christian charity, the society sprang from the brain of a disappointed military adventurer and began at once to scatter the seeds of strife and discord. Almost from the beginning it has been a disturber of the peace of nations, suffering only such as have bestowed patronage upon it to escape its maledictions and plottings. The members of the society are numerous and powerful in the United States. They are constantly increasing, mainly by accessions from their drilled and disciplined companions in Europe, but also by conversions of unsuspecting young men who are seduced by their vain and supercilious pretensions as educators. They are, as they have always been, selfish and vindictive, restless under opposition, and compromising in nothing. They have neither country, nor homes, nor families, nor friendships beyond the limits of their order, none of the affections of the heart which give them charm to life and social intercourse, being required to abandon all these and fit themselves for uninquiring obedience to their general, whose commands, whether right or wrong, good or bad, they have solemnly vowed to execute without the least regard for consequences. Having persistently refused to become reconciled to the forms and methods of Christian civilization which prevail among our Protestant population, once in Protestant America, they employ all the resources they can command in endeavoring to arrest them. They insist that church and state shall be united wheresoever they are separate, and that the basis of such union shall be the subordination of the state to the church. Self-government by the people is held by them to be a violative of the divine law, and on that account may rightfully be resisted as heretical when its overthrow can be assured. They will allow no rights to exist in either states, peoples, or individuals against what they consider the prerogatives of their society as defined by their general, who, in their estimation, possesses the divine right to enlarge or contract them at his own pleasure. There must be no limitation to the power and independence of the Pope, either in the spiritual or temporal domain, except where the interests of their society command otherwise. And they must be full, absolute, unquestioned, to the extent defined by himself. His liberty must be such that he may, at his own discretion, curtail the liberties of all others. His spiritual sovereignty must include whatsoever he shall embrace within it. Neither the existence nor the extent of his sovereignty must be brought in question before any human tribunal. That means he's a sovereign. But he alone shall define it, together with the character of the obedience he shall exact. And if, in the course of the papal economy, he should ever find it necessary to hold in one hand emblems of harmony and peace, this restless and uncompromising society stands always ready to place the rod of chastisement in the other. The conflict of opinions, therefore, in which the Protestant people of the United States find themselves engaged is not of their inviting. They are unwilling parties to it. Because of this, a sense of both duty and security demands that the history and character of this skilled and powerful adversary, alien in birth and growth and sentiment, should be understood. These are the Jesuits. These are the ones we do war with, and we must know completely about them if we are to succeed.
Yes, and here the recording from Eric Jon Phelps ends abruptly, but as you can hear with the music, the hour is over anyway, but he didn't get a beep sign so that he could slow down in reading his text. I want to make a final comment on what he just read from the book that was from the History of Protestantism, and then afterwards it was from the Footprints of the Jesuits from what's the author again? R.W. Thompson. Sorry. I want to make a point that Eric has not made, and I think that is very important. When we read this last paragraph again that Eric just read, I'm going to go a little bit back and repeat what he says here. Having persistently refused to become reconciled to the forms and methods of Christian civilization which prevail among our Protestant population, speaking of America, of course, they employ all the resources they can command in endeavoring to arrest them. They insist that church and state shall be united wheresoever they are separate, and that in the basis of such union shall be the subordination of the state to the church. Self-government by the people is held by them to be violative of the divine law, and on that account might rightfully resist it as heretical when its overthrow can be assured. They will allow no rights to exist in either states, peoples, or individuals against what they consider prerogatives of their society as defined by their general who, in their estimation, possesses the divine right to enlarge or contract them at his pleasure. There must be no limitation to the power and independence of the Pope, either in the spiritual or temporal domain, except where the interests of the society command otherwise. And this is the sentence where I want to go into a little final comment of this part of this University of Hidden History. Again, there must be no limitation to the power and independence of the Pope, either in the spiritual or temporal domain, except where the interest of the society commands otherwise. Now, what Eric has not mentioned yet, I don't know if he does, but that's in the book of Griesinger that he read here, The Jesuits' Complete History. There is mentioning of a certain bull that the Pope signed in 1542 or 1543 that is called Injunctum Nobis. And in this bull, the General of the Society of Jesus gets complete carte blanche, means absolute power, to even change the constitution of the Jesuit order, even without the knowledge or agreement of the Pope, but the Pope must not even be put into notice that something has been changed. He will agree. So that this means, to say this in normal terms, this means that in 1542, 1543, with the bull Injunctum Nobis, the Pope gave all the power to the Superior General of the Society that he wanted. The Superior General of the Society of Jesus is the absolute power man in this world. He is the man of sin. We always say that the Antichrist is the papacy and the Pope is the Antichrist, and that's true. He is for the outward world that Antichrist, but he again is ruled from the back by a Superior General of the Society of Jesus who can, at his own will, change the constitution and the direction of the order wherever he wants to go. The only thing the Pope has is he is, as we can say, quote-unquote infallible, since the First Vatican Council in 1870. Now, the Jesuits were the ones who called that council in 1870 and who ran that council in 1870. And why were they pushing the Pope to be made infallible? Because they control the Pope. So whatever the Pope says, quote-unquote ex cathedra, from his throne on subjects of faith and morals within the Roman Catholic Church, he speaks infallibly. But it's the General of the Society of Jesus that is being made speaking infallibly. In the constitutions of the Jesuits, it is numerous times, I think more than 50 times repeated, that the General of the Society of Jesus must be viewed by the members of the Society of Jesus as Jesus Christ, Christ on earth. He is also, quote-unquote also, like the Pope, the Vicar of Christ on earth. Probably even more the Vicar of Christ on earth than the real Pope, because every Jesuit swears his allegiance to the General of the Society of Jesus and not to the Pope. And if to the Pope, through the Pope, to the General of the Society of Jesus. I think this is a very interesting little addendum to what Eric Jon Phelps has to say here, or says here. Maybe he comes to this in the next part, I don't know. I'm saying you this right now. It says in the footprints of the Jesuits, there must be no limitation to the power and independence of the Pope, either in the spiritual or temporal domain, except where the interests of their society commands otherwise. The interests of their society will always have the interests of the Pope in mind, because it is the mind of the Jesuits that controls the mind of the Pope. So what the Pope says is what the Black General, what the Black Pope says. What also is the name of the superior of the Society of Jesus. Yeah, it's absolutely of absolute importance to understand this point, that is the main reason why the Jesuits called for the council in 1870 and made the Pope infallible. Because now, as they control the Pope, the Black Pope, the General of the Society of Jesus, speaks infallibly from the throne. It is not the Pope that speaks from the throne. It is the General of the Society of Jesus. Huh? It says here, his liberty must be such that he may, at his own discretion, curtail the liberties of all others. His spiritual sovereignty must include whatsoever he shall embrace within it. Neither the existence nor the extent of this sovereignty must be brought in question before any human tribunal. The Pope is judge of all men, but can't be judged by no man. But he alone shall define it, together with the character of the obedience he shall exact. And if, in the course of the papal economy, he should ever find it necessary to hold in one hand emblems and harmony and peace, this restless and uncompromising society stands always ready to place the rod of chastisement in the other. So, I hope I made this point, this little addendum to what Eric Jon Phelps said. And I tell you that this bull Injunctum Nobis Griesinger mentions in his book, it is very hard to find in the world. You can do your own research, you can read Griesinger on it, and you can look up the sources. But it's a little bit of a question from why is that almost never mentioned. Interesting point. Anyway, Injunctum Nobis gives the power, or transfers the power from the white Pope to the Black Pope. From the Pope we all know to the Pope that is in the unknown. That is in the shadow of the white Pope, but that Black Pope is actually the substance. As Jesus was the substance of the law that was foreshadowing him, in the same way, the Black Pope is the substance and the white Pope is just the shadow of the Roman Catholic Church. The white Pope is infallible because the Black Pope controls him. And that was made sure already in 1542. And that is why I always say that all these forbidding the Jesuits in 1773 by Pope Clement XIV, I think, and all that, that was just theater for the world. It was all planned longhand before, and I read and explained that in my reading and discussion of the book Rules of Evil by F. Tapasauci. Yeah? I just want to end with this, and then we can go into the next round, part 4 of Eric Jon Phelps in this University of Hidden History. And I thank you all for watching and listening, and hope that you all read your Bible. Maranatha. We must start at the foot of the cross. For our souls in danger, we're at loss. And when we kneel in that awesome place, at that very moment, you'll feel God's grace. Friend, let me tell you, you need to know, there is heaven, also hell below. Christ died on that cross to set you free from your vile sins and hell's agony. You're God's enemy without the cross. Reject Christ, and to God you're dross. To the prison of hell he will send, just Christ's work on the cross makes amends. God hates those who try to enter in, the gates of heaven still full of sin. Only his Son can take sin away. Go to the foot of the cross this day. God has provided only one way to enter heaven's wondrous array. Accept what Jesus did for us all. He paid our debt, so hell won't befall. Go to the foot of the cross this day. His precious blood washes sin away. We each need to think more of his cross. Without our Savior, we're total loss.